The summer of 1943 brought something extraordinary to Camp Hearn in Texas. As the first trains pulled in, carrying German prisoners from North Africa, these men encountered realities that would shake the very foundations of everything Nazi propaganda had taught them about America and the world beyond Germany's borders. These soldiers had served under Erwin Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps. They'd been captured in Tunisia after the Axis forces collapsed there, joining the vast wave of German and Italian troops who laid down their weapons on May 13, 1943. Roughly 250,000 to 275,000 men who surrendered to the Allies that single month. Over the coming 3 years, what these prisoners would witness on American soil would systematically dismantle every assumption the Nazi regime had drilled into their minds about American weakness, American society, and American power. While the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, established by Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson on November 3, 1944, would eventually document the physical devastation wrought on German cities by Allied bombing campaigns, something equally profound was already happening in the minds of 371,683 German prisoners scattered across American camps. These men would see with their own eyes the industrial capacity that made Allied victory not just possible, but inevitable. The journey began in the North African ports where prisoners first encountered American efficiency. At processing centers in Iran and Casablanca, thousands of Germans moved through daily with organizational precision that rivaled or perhaps exceeded anything Germany had accomplished at its industrial peak. Medical exams, paperwork, briefings on Geneva Convention protections, all conducted with methodical precision and speed. But nothing prepared them for the food. After months eating meager desert rations, these prisoners suddenly received white bread, real coffee, meat appearing twice a day. This wasn't special treatment designed for propaganda purposes. This was simply what American soldiers ate as standard fare. The ships that carried them across the Atlantic became floating classrooms in American capability. Liberty ships, mass-produced at factories running around the clock, ferried thousands of prisoners at a time, while the celebrated SS Robert E. Lee was assembled in just 4 days and 15 hours through carefully orchestrated propaganda. The typical Liberty ship still rolled off production lines every 39 to 42 days during 1943 and 1944, a pace German shipyards could never match. During the 2-week crossing, prisoners watched in disbelief as American sailors casually discarded half-finished meals, food waste that exceeded what German soldiers received as full daily rations. The ships themselves bristled with radar and modern navigation equipment that Germany still considered experimental technology, yet here it was standard equipment on ordinary cargo vessels. When the prisoners reached American ports, Norfolk, Boston, New York, they stepped into an industrial landscape that defied comprehension. Norfolk Naval Base alone sprawled across 4,300 acres of simultaneous construction and repair operations that dwarfed anything in German naval facilities. In a single day's observation, prisoners counted dozens of vessels in various construction stages, more ships than many German ports handled in months. The rail journey to their assigned camps delivered the most conclusive evidence yet that everything they'd been told about American industrial weakness was fiction. Unlike the cattle cars used for German troop movements, these prisoners rode in passenger coaches with actual seats, dining areas, and sleeping berths. Through the windows rolled past an electrified nation that shocked their sensibilities. Every town, no matter how small, blazed with electric lights. Rural areas that would have been pitch black in Germany glowed with illumination from farmhouses and barns. Factories operated through night shifts with parking lots crammed full of workers' private automobiles. A sight impossible in Germany, where car ownership remained a privilege reserved for the elite and Nazi officials. The camps themselves shattered every preconception. Built quickly but solidly, facilities like Camp Hearn in Texas, Camp Shelby in Mississippi, and Fort Robinson in Nebraska offered conditions superior to what many prisoners had known as ordinary civilians back home. The United States had constructed over 500 camps across 46 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont, including 175 major facilities and over 325 branch camps. These camps ranged from holding 250 prisoners to as many as 12,000, and construction typically finished in roughly 90 days. Wooden barracks featured electric lights, indoor plumbing, and heating systems. The underlying infrastructure, water treatment plants, electrical generation facilities, sewage systems, represented engineering on a scale that exceeded many German towns and small cities. Camp hospitals alone surpassed most civilian medical facilities in Germany. Modern X-ray equipment, fully equipped surgical theaters, pharmaceutical supplies, all standard provisions. American medical staff used penicillin freely, a drug German forces could barely obtain, even for the most critical cases. The systematic approach to prisoner health, regular examinations, dental care, treatment for chronic illnesses, demonstrated resources Germany couldn't even provide its own soldiers. The camp kitchens revealed the depths of American agricultural abundance. Refrigeration units, rare luxuries in most German facilities, preserved fresh meat and vegetables year-round. Electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges capable of feeding thousands operated continuously. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, in quantities exceeding what German civilians had seen since before the war began. The regulations requiring kitchens to prepare 10% extra food to ensure adequate portions caused genuine psychological pain among prisoners from a nation living under severe rationing. By autumn 1943, American labor shortages opened opportunity. German prisoners began working in agriculture and industry, an economic necessity for America, but one that exposed these Germans to American methods and technologies in unprecedented ways. On Midwestern farms, they witnessed mechanization that revolutionized their entire understanding of farming. Single Iowa or Nebraska farms encompassed more acreage than entire German villages. Tractors, combines, and harvesters allowed individual farmers to cultivate hundreds of acres with minimal labor. Hybrid seed corn developed through American agricultural research yielded twice what traditional varieties produced. Chemical fertilizers, substances Germany desperately needed for explosives, sat abundantly available for farming purposes. Rural electrification had brought power to over 90% of American farms by 1943, compared to less than 20% in Germany. The contrast in agricultural productivity seemed almost unreal. American farms achieved harvests that German agriculture struggled to match despite using far fewer workers. Where Germany required dozens of agricultural workers using traditional methods to work a plot of land, a single American farmer with modern machinery accomplished the same task alone. Farming had transformed from traditional practice into industrial science. Soil testing, crop rotation, scientific breeding programs all applied systematically. Prisoners assigned to food processing facilities witnessed automation that exceeded German industrial imagination. Canneries in California and New Jersey operated production lines, processing volumes that would have required hundreds of workers in Germany. Automated filling machines, electric conveyor systems, quality control procedures hummed along with skeleton crews as American workers served in the military. Yet production exceeded peacetime levels through pure efficiency and mechanization. Near industrial centers, though kept away from direct war production, prisoners glimpsed the edges of American manufacturing power. The Detroit area alone contained more automotive production capacity than existed throughout all of Germany. Plants that once built automobiles now manufactured tanks, aircraft engines, military vehicles at rates German industry never approached. The Willow Run plant, visible to nearby working prisoners, achieved peak production in April 1944 of one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes, a capability German aircraft manufacturers couldn't achieve even for simpler fighter designs. Electricity saturated everything in America. Factories, farms, homes consumed power at rates that seemed impossible. A single aluminum plant in Tennessee consumed more electricity than entire German cities. The Tennessee Valley Authority and similar projects had harnessed rivers for power generation on scales Germany never attempted. The Hoover Dam alone generated more electricity than multiple German power plants combined. This electrical abundance fueled continuous industrial production, three-shift factory operations, and civilian lifestyles consuming resources Germany reserved exclusively for military purposes. The treatment accorded Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943 delivered another shock to German prisoners. Italian POWs who cooperated with American authorities received better quarters, paid work assignments, even permitted social interaction with American civilians. German prisoners watched their former allies gradually integrating into American society while they remained behind fences, yet even their confinement exceeded what Germany provided its own forces. Christmas 1943 struck perhaps the deepest psychological blow. American churches and civic organizations sent packages to German prisoners, enemies whose nation continued actively fighting America. Churches held Christmas services conducted in German. Local communities donated food for special holiday meals. Only a nation supremely confident in victory could afford such generosity toward defeated adversaries. This revealed not weakness, but absolute strength born from certainty. Educational opportunities in the camps surpassed what many prisoners had experienced in Germany. By early 1944, approximately 25,000 prisoners completed formal coursework, ranging from English language instruction to American history to vocational training. Major American universities provided correspondence courses and occasional visiting lecturers. Camp libraries contained thousands of volumes, including German language materials. Prisoners read multiple newspapers, experiencing press freedom unknown under Nazi rule, where media served solely as state propaganda apparatus. University professors lectured on democracy and economics. This intellectual engagement, combined with experiencing American material abundance firsthand, proved more persuasive than any propaganda program could have been. Prisoners didn't merely observe American success, they studied the systems producing it. Camp newspapers published by prisoners themselves reflected this gradual transformation. By 1945, prisoners were publishing 135 different newspapers across various camps. Publications that began with strident nationalist declarations gradually shifted toward discussions of post-war reconstruction and democratic governance. American authorities permitted remarkable editorial freedom, allowing prisoners to explore political and economic concepts forbidden under Nazi rule. One significant publication was Der Ruf, published at Fort Kearny in Rhode Island and distributed nationwide. This carefully edited newspaper, staffed by anti-Nazi prisoners selected through the re-education program, gradually introduced democratic concepts and critical examination of Germany's future. The evolution from initial defiance to eventual acceptance of democratic principles provided documented evidence of ideological transformation occurring among the prisoner population. D-Day's announcement on June 6, 1944, delivered crushing confirmation of American power. The invasion armada, thousands of ships, aircraft, hundreds of thousands of troops, represented organizational capability beyond German comprehension. Newsreels shown to prisoners days after the landings revealed the vast fleet, the artificial harbors, the supply systems sustaining the entire operation. Prisoners understood then that their homeland faced not merely military defeat, but complete industrial overwhelming. Spring 1945 brought war's end in Europe. As American forces liberated Nazi concentration camps, footage was shown to German prisoners. Many initially rejected the images as Allied propaganda. But testimony from American soldiers, international observers, and eventually letters from Germany confirmed the horrific reality. This moral revelation completed the psychological transformation. Germany hadn't merely lost militarily and industrially, but the entire Nazi project stood exposed as criminal enterprise. The statistics documenting German POW experience in America reveal the program's remarkable scale and success. From 1943 to 1946, America held 371,683 German prisoners across 46 states. Only 2,022 escape attempts occurred, below 1%. While Georg Gertner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico, on September 21, 1945, and remained free for 40 years before voluntarily surrendering in 1985, the overall recapture rate exceeded 99%. American civilians suffered no harm from escaped prisoners. prisoners contributed significantly to the American war effort through their labor. Documented evidence confirms that prisoners earned 80 cents daily, while businesses paid the government 45 cents per hour for each laborer. In 1944 alone, the government received $22 million from prisoner wages, with estimated savings of $80 million from using prisoners at military installations. The military's secret re-education program carefully documented psychological transformation occurring among prisoners. The Special Projects Division, operating under the Provost Marshal General's Office, implemented sophisticated ideological reorientation efforts. Historical assessment of effectiveness remained mixed, however. While 25,000 prisoners completed democracy courses through the Rapid Post-VE Day program, sources confirmed the program failed to change the vast majority's views during the war itself. The approach evolved over time, initially exposing prisoners to American media and educational materials, later incorporating structured coursework on democratic governance, free market economics, constitutional law. Selected anti-Nazi prisoners received training as instructors and discussion leaders, creating peer-to-peer education models proving more effective than direct American instruction. Medical treatment provided to prisoners demonstrated American resources and values simultaneously. German doctors working in camp hospitals learned techniques using equipment unavailable in Germany. Mental health treatment, virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht, was provided to traumatized soldiers. Attempted suicides received counseling rather than punishment. This humanity toward enemies revealed strength through compassion rather than brutality. Camp hospitals like those at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and Camp Carson, Colorado, included fully equipped surgical suites, X-ray departments, laboratories. German medical personnel worked alongside American staff, gaining experience with advanced treatments. Penicillin, still experimental and scarce in Germany, was routine in American POW camps. Prisoners received dental care, eyeglasses, prosthetics, services many had never accessed as German civilians. Religious life in the camps challenged Nazi anti-religious ideology directly. Chaplains conducted services in German. Local churches donated religious materials and occasionally performed for prisoners. This spiritual dimension of American life, actively suppressed under Nazi rule, offered prisoners alternative frameworks for understanding human dignity and social organization. When chaplains organized religious services throughout the camps, attendance figures painted a striking picture of spiritual hunger among the detained men. Some facilities reported that more than 6 in 10 prisoners participated in Catholic Mass, Protestant worship, or Jewish observances. Those Jewish refugees who had escaped the horrors of Nazi Germany sometimes stepped forward as translators and cultural intermediaries. Their presence created an uncomfortable reckoning for many prisoners, forcing them to see as human beings the very people their political ideology had taught them to despise. As work details moved prisoners across the country for labor assignments and construction projects, they witnessed firsthand the vast web of American infrastructure that connected the entire continent. The rail lines that stretched across the nation moved enormous volumes of cargo with remarkable efficiency. Highways crisscrossed the country, binding communities together. Oil pipelines carried fuel from coast to coast. Remarkably, this vast infrastructure had emerged through democratic processes and public planning rather than through the authoritarian command systems the prisoners knew from Germany. The military received what it needed, yet American civilians continued to enjoy comfort and prosperity that seemed almost unimaginable to men from a resource-starved nation. When prisoners worked on railroad maintenance crews, they encountered the true sophistication of American logistics. Automatic switching systems guided trains with precision. Centralized control towers orchestrated traffic across hundreds of miles of track. Maintenance procedures kept the massive network functioning at peak capacity, day after day. During labor details in civilian areas, prisoners glimpsed the homes where American railroad workers and factory hands lived. These weren't cramped quarters or Spartan accommodations. Workers had homes equipped with electricity, running water, and modern kitchen appliances. Their children attended free public schools without cost. Medical care came through insurance provided by employers. This broad-based prosperity contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught about American capitalism, grinding workers into poverty and desperation. The consumer goods surrounding the prisoners revealed a society producing for comfort, not mere subsistence. Automobiles rolled off assembly lines in staggering numbers, affordable to ordinary families. Radios brought entertainment and news into homes across the nation. Refrigerators preserved food in kitchens everywhere. The sheer volume of manufactured goods available to average citizens represented production capacity that seemed almost impossible to German observers. The United States was simultaneously fighting a global war and maintaining consumer abundance that Germany could never have matched even in peacetime. The racial composition of American military units and factory floors presented a stunning contradiction to Nazi racial ideology. Certainly, racial discrimination existed in 1940s America. That reality was impossible to ignore. Yet even this limited integration vastly exceeded the rigid racial laws that governed Nazi Germany. Prisoners watched African American soldiers operate complex machinery with confidence. They saw black workers holding positions of genuine responsibility and authority. Some prisoners later recorded their astonishment at witnessing African American sergeants giving orders to white troops. They saw skilled black workers training white employees on factory equipment, scenes that would have been legally impossible under Nazi racial doctrine. The velocity of American technological innovation impressed technically educated prisoners deeply. Equipment that functioned perfectly would be replaced by newer models. Production processes continuously evolved. New systems displaced functional ones routinely. This constant drive toward improvement contrasted sharply with German industrial philosophy, which emphasized perfecting existing designs rather than constantly seeking better alternatives. The quality control methods operating in American factories seemed revolutionary. Statistical sampling, precise tolerance specifications, and systematic inspection processes caught defects before they became problems. German manufacturing had relied upon individual craftsmen's skill and pride in workmanship. American factories achieved superior quality through process control, through systematic organization that eliminated defects regardless of individual worker expertise. The sight of women working as skilled industrial laborers challenged everything the Nazi system had taught about women's capabilities. Women operated heavy machinery. They supervised production crews. They performed technical work that Nazi ideology classified as impossible for the female mind to master. While propaganda about Rosie the Riveter contained exaggeration, the reality of female industrial participation exceeded anything Germany had attempted, despite facing desperate labor shortages that made women's participation militarily necessary. The credit systems operating throughout American society demonstrated financial sophistication beyond German experience. Farmers borrowed money to purchase equipment that increased productivity. Workers bought homes with mortgages, gradually building equity. This productive application of credit financed growth. Germany's conservative financial system couldn't generate equivalent expansion. Prisoners encountered concepts like installment buying and consumer credit. The notion that banks existed partly to facilitate economic growth rather than merely storing wealth. These ideas seemed foreign to men raised in German economic traditions. Research laboratories and university programs visible to prisoners with technical knowledge showed systematic commitment to future technology. American companies invested in fundamental science while maintaining current production. This forward-looking approach contrasted sharply with German focus on immediate military needs. Prisoners with technical training grasped that long-term technological dominance required sustained investment in basic research, not just engineering for immediate applications. American managers delegated authority to subordinates in ways that astounded German prisoners accustomed to rigid hierarchy. Lower-level managers made decisions that would have required senior approval in German organizations. This distributed decision-making increased efficiency and developed leadership throughout the organization. The concept of management by objective rather than detailed hierarchical supervision seemed revolutionary to men trained in authoritarian command structures. Labor relations in American facilities demonstrated that productivity flourished through cooperation rather than coercion. While unions faced restrictions during wartime, the basic framework of collective bargaining remained intact. Workers participated in productivity improvements because they knew they would share the benefits. This stakeholder approach exceeded the effectiveness of German authoritarian management. Prisoners observed suggestion boxes where workers could submit ideas. Productivity bonuses rewarded improvements. Worker committees addressed safety and conditions. These mechanisms for employee participation were unthinkable in Nazi Germany's command economy. Safety practices in American industrial facilities prioritized worker protection as a matter of routine. Guards protected machinery hazards. Ventilation systems removed harmful dust and fumes. Protective equipment was provided as standard practice. This investment in worker safety, extended even to prisoner labor, demonstrated that human capital possessed value beyond mere exploitation. The contrast with German industrial practices, where worker safety had often been sacrificed for production quotas, struck prisoners forcefully. The standardization practiced across American industry enabled mass production efficiency that Germany couldn't match. Screws, bolts, electrical components, and thousands of other parts were interchangeable between manufacturers. This standardization allowed production flexibility and simplified maintenance. German industries lacked this standardization, which hindered production efficiency, prevented integration between different manufacturers, and complicated maintenance of complex equipment. Supply chain management in American operations demonstrated logistical sophistication. Raw materials flowed continuously to production facilities. Finished goods moved efficiently to users. This coordinated movement of materials, managed through democratic cooperation rather than authoritarian command, sustained production levels unprecedented in human history. American workers accessed professional development opportunities through night schools and correspondence courses while employed full-time. They improved their skills and advanced their careers through education. This meritocratic advancement opportunity challenged German class-based limitations where workers' futures were largely predetermined by birth and education access. The environmental abundance surrounding the camps astonished prisoners from resource-scarce Germany. Forests covered vast regions. Mineral deposits lay accessible. Agricultural land stretched across continents. Water resources existed in quantities Germany could only dream about. This resource base, combined with industrial capability, made American victory inevitable. Prisoners watched the casual exploitation of seemingly limitless natural wealth with amazement born from deprivation. Communication infrastructure spanning the nation demonstrated information systems far exceeding German capabilities. Telephone networks permitted routine long-distance conversations. Radio broadcasting brought instant news from around the world. Mail service delivered letters across the continent within days. Americans communicated across vast distances as though it were ordinary, because for them it was. This connectivity enabled coordination that Germany's limited communication systems could never achieve. Public health measures throughout the camps and surrounding communities demonstrated systematic approaches to population wellness. Vaccination programs protected against infectious disease. Sanitation systems prevented contamination. Health education promoted prevention. Germany's ideologically driven health policies had subordinated wellness to racial doctrine. The American approach, focused on practical disease prevention, regardless of ideology, achieved superior health outcomes. The cultural production continuing during wartime amazed prisoners accustomed to total mobilization. Hollywood produced morale-boosting entertainment, while factories produced weapons. This dual capacity for creation and destruction exceeded German capabilities. Prisoners watched American films depicting self-criticism and social problems, including works that portrayed the nation's failings with frank honesty. That a nation fighting for survival would permit such critical examination of its own shortcomings seemed extraordinary. Voluntary organizations visible through prisoner interactions demonstrated civil society's strength. Religious groups, the YMCA, the Red Cross, and civic clubs all contributed to prisoner welfare. Americans organized themselves for mutual benefit without state compulsion. This associational life had been destroyed in Nazi Germany. These independent organizations sustained democratic culture in ways totalitarian systems could never replicate. The production statistics prisoners gradually learned created a picture of overwhelming industrial superiority. The United States produced approximately 300,000 aircraft during the war, 86,000 tanks, and 2.6 million trucks, along with vast quantities of every military necessity. Civilian consumption remained above pre-war levels throughout the conflict. America launched more naval vessels in 1943 alone than Japan produced during the entire war. Shipyards turned out tonnage so rapidly that by autumn 1943, all Allied shipping sunk since 1939 had been replaced. These weren't propaganda claims. Prisoners verified them through their own observations. Those who worked near ports counted the ships. Those near aircraft plants watched bombers emerge from assembly lines. Those in agricultural areas witnessed harvests capable of feeding entire nations. The evidence was inescapable. The individual transformations among prisoners seemed remarkable. Officers who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler began planning democratic reconstruction. Committed Nazis fell silent when confronted with evidence of American industrial capacity. Production statistics they initially dismissed as propaganda proved conservative when prisoners witnessed actual American output. Walter Holstein, captured during the Battle of Cherbourg in June 1944 and held at Camp Como, Mississippi, organized a camp university where he taught law to fellow prisoners. He participated in the American Re-Education Program, attending administrative school at Fort Getty, Rhode Island. After the war, Holstein became the first president of the Commission of the European Economic Community from 1958 to 1967, helping to establish the foundations for what would eventually become the European Union. The Re-Education Program, established in late 1943 under Lieutenant Colonel Edward Davison's leadership, remains one of the most complex and controversial aspects of the prisoner experience. Operating initially in complete secrecy, it pursued an ambitious goal: transforming Nazi soldiers into democratic citizens who could participate in rebuilding Germany. The program categorized prisoners into three groups: anti-Nazis, comprising roughly 1 in 10 prisoners; non-political prisoners, numbering between 75 and 80%; and committed Nazis, comprising between 1 and 2%. Strategy focused on the middle group, using anti-Nazi prisoners as instructors while isolating hardcore Nazis to prevent their corrupting influence. Sophisticated psychological techniques included exposure to American media and literature, demonstrating democratic values, structured courses on American history and government, discussion groups led by anti-Nazi prisoners, vocational training emphasizing civilian rather than military skills, and gradual introduction of information regarding Nazi atrocities. The effectiveness of these efforts remains debated among historians. While 25,000 prisoners completed formal democracy courses, contemporary assessments suggest limited immediate impact. A 1946 report from the Provost Marshal General's Office acknowledged the program failed to achieve fundamental changes in thinking for the vast majority of prisoners. However, longer-term impacts may have been more significant, as many former prisoners later occupied positions in West German Reconstruction, where they implemented American-inspired methods. Though the Marshall Plan wasn't announced until 1947, groundwork for German-American cooperation had been laid through the prisoner experience. Former prisoners who had witnessed American methods became advocates for adopting these techniques during Reconstruction. They understood that prosperity came through production rather than conquest, that democracy could generate wealth more effectively than authoritarianism, and that treating workers as stakeholders produced superior results to coercion. Technical assistance accompanying the Marshall Plan, built upon relationships and understanding, developed during the prisoner years. Former prisoners who had experienced American industrial methods firsthand became interpreters and facilitators for American advisors working in Germany. They translated not just language, but cultural concepts, bridging gaps between American expertise and German implementation. The agricultural transformation former prisoners advocated proved particularly significant. German farming had remained largely traditional. Small plots worked with animal power and limited mechanization. Prisoners who had worked on American farms returned advocating land consolidation, mechanization, and scientific farming methods. They had witnessed how American farmers with machinery could cultivate hundreds of acres, how scientific breeding and fertilization doubled yields, and how rural electrification transformed farm productivity. These advocates faced resistance from traditional German farming communities. However, post-war food shortages created openings for reform. Former prisoners who could explain American methods from personal experience became valuable advisors in agricultural reconstruction programs. The transformation of German agriculture in the 1950s from traditional to modern mechanized farming owed much to knowledge gained during American captivity. Industrial methods observed by prisoners found application in German reconstruction. Quality control procedures, production line organization, and worker safety practices observed in American factories were implemented in rebuilt German industries. The concept of continuous improvement witnessed in American plants that constantly upgraded equipment and procedures replaced German traditions of perfecting existing systems. Former prisoners who had observed American management techniques introduced concepts like management by objective, distributed decision-making, and worker participation in productivity improvements. Ideas revolutionary in German industrial culture that gradually took hold during Reconstruction. The German economic miracle of the 1950s incorporated many American methods first observed by prisoners. The psychological transformation among prisoners extended beyond mere observation of material abundance. Prisoners experienced a fundamental shift in worldview. For nearly 4 years, captured German soldiers discovered their entire worldview had been fundamentally wrong. They'd been indoctrinated with the belief that democracy inevitably descended into chaos, that societies mixing different races weakened themselves, that capitalism exploited workers and left them suffering. What they actually witnessed shattered every assumption. They saw order thriving under freedom, strength emerging from diversity, and widespread prosperity flowing from market-driven economies. This jarring contradiction between what they'd been taught and what they observed created a psychological crisis that experts would later identify as ideological collapse syndrome. The signs of this internal turmoil manifested in predictable ways. Prisoners began withdrawing from political conversations, openly renouncing beliefs they'd once held sacred, and displaying genuine hunger to understand completely different systems. Camp psychologists carefully documented these shifts, recording that even prisoners who maintained their love for Germany and its traditions completely abandoned Nazi ideology once confronted with facts that contradicted it. Yet this transformation wasn't happening everywhere at once, nor did everyone experience it the same way. A significant portion of prisoners remained unconvinced, preferring to believe that American wealth came from geographical luck or temporary wartime advantages rather than superior systems. Some insisted that Nazi Germany's approach, if properly executed, would have proved superior. Still, even the most resistant prisoners couldn't deny what their own eyes showed them. America's capacity to produce goods and materials dwarfed anything Nazi Germany had ever accomplished or could possibly accomplish. Beyond the structured re-education classes, something far more important unfolded through everyday cultural encounters. Prisoners laboring on farms sat down to eat meals with American families, sharing tables and breaking bread together. Those working in factories stood side by side with American workers on production lines. These intimate human moments accomplished what no classroom lecture ever could. Nazi propaganda crumbled when prisoners looked into the eyes of ordinary Americans, showing them basic kindness. Years after the war ended, many former prisoners kept writing letters to the American families who had employed them, maintaining these friendships across an entire ocean and decades of separation. What started as simple acts of decency grew into genuine friendships that helped heal the terrible wound between former enemies. When former POWs returned to America for reunions in the years that followed, they brought their wives and children, their grandchildren and grandparents. These gatherings bore witness to something remarkable: human connections forged during imprisonment that proved stronger than any ideology, more lasting than any political boundary. The spiritual dimension of imprisonment deserves deeper consideration. Nazi leadership had twisted traditional Christian teachings, subordinating them to racial theories and state control. In American camps, prisoners encountered authentic Christianity, lived without state interference or ideological corruption. Churches from surrounding communities ministered to these prisoners, demonstrating faith expressed through voluntary commitment and genuine service to others, never through state coercion or obligation. The spiritual awakening experienced by many prisoners proved extraordinarily significant. Chapel services in camps drew more prisoners than anything similar had managed in German military units or German cities before the war. Prisoners discovered in genuine Christian teachings an escape route from Nazi ideology, a different way to understand their circumstances, and a foundation for rebuilding their lives after everything collapsed. The Christian democratic reconstruction that would reshape Germany after 1945 drew crucial support from thousands of former POWs who had recovered religious faith while imprisoned in America. The educational opportunities provided within camps extended far beyond practical job training or political instruction. For countless prisoners, particularly working-class men who had never finished formal schooling, the camps opened educational doors that would have remained forever closed. They acquired fluency in English, absorbed American literature and ideas, enrolled in distance learning courses from universities across America, and participated in serious intellectual exchanges, something absolutely unthinkable under Nazi censorship. This mental liberation held special importance for younger prisoners whose entire education had been controlled by Nazi ideology from childhood. When they encountered competing ideas, learned to think critically, and experienced genuine debate, it fundamentally shifted how they approached knowledge and authority. After returning to Germany, numerous former prisoners pursued university education and professional training, building upon the intellectual curiosity and skills they developed in American camps. Witnessing American capitalism directly shattered another pillar of Nazi teachings. They had absorbed propaganda claiming capitalism inevitably victimized workers, that corporate ownership meant systematic oppression, that workers could never prosper under such systems. The reality they encountered contradicted everything. They watched ordinary workers drive cars, own homes, support families comfortably, and negotiate with management through unions. Widespread prosperity materialized through market mechanisms, not despite them. This economic education became essential for Germany's reconstruction after the war. Former prisoners comprehended how markets functioned, grasped consumer financing concepts, understood labor relations from first-hand experience. They had personally observed how productive investment generated growth differently than simple accumulation, how credit enabled expansion rather than mere consumption, how worker prosperity strengthened rather than threatened overall economic development. These German prisoners had lived inside American society for years, not as tourists or diplomats, but as working residents. Unlike hostile stereotypes Nazi propaganda had promoted, or the superficial impressions visitors might gather, these men had operated within American life authentically. They understood both American capabilities and limitations, its genuine strengths and real weaknesses, all based on direct experience rather than theory. This knowledge became invaluable when the Cold War began. Former POWs who genuinely comprehended American power and American intentions could effectively counter Soviet propaganda portraying America as imperialistic and aggressive. They possessed personal knowledge that American strength derived from manufacturing capacity rather than territorial conquest, from freedom rather than oppression. Their eyewitness testimony helped secure West Germany's commitment to the Atlantic Partnership. While certain particular statistics regarding the POW program resist verification, the documented numbers themselves impress even today. At its height, America held 371,683 German prisoners of war. Including Italian and Japanese prisoners, the total reached 425,171 individuals held across camps in 46 states. Every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont hosted some camps. The operation encompassed 175 main facilities, plus more than 325 smaller branch camps. Prisoners attempted escape 2,022 times, yet fewer than 1% succeeded in getting away. Approximately 25,000 participated in structured democracy courses. Camp newspapers reached prisoners through 135 different publications. Most impressively, the military completed construction of new camps in roughly 90 days. These numbers represent one of the most extensive prisoner of war programs ever organized anywhere, accomplished while America simultaneously waged a devastating global conflict across multiple theaters. The sheer scale revealed American organizational capacity and industrial power. The POW experience varied dramatically depending on geographic location. Those imprisoned in the agricultural heartland of the Midwest witnessed farming transformed by mechanization and agricultural productivity that seemed almost miraculous. Prisoners held in the industrial Northeast observed the scale of American manufacturing and urban abundance. Those in southern camps encountered racial segregation that seemed to validate certain Nazi propaganda. Yet paradoxically, they also saw Black Americans holding positions of authority, something that contradicted Nazi racial ideology entirely. Western camps exposed prisoners to vast natural resources and the dynamic energy of frontier expansion. These geographical differences combined to create a comprehensive portrait of American society. Prisoners couldn't explain away prosperity as confined to one region or limited to particular industries. From the Maine coast to California's Pacific edge, from Michigan's Great Lakes to Texas's sprawling interior, they witnessed industrial capacity and material abundance that exceeded anything their homeland possessed. German career military officers experienced this contradiction especially acutely. Their training emphasized German military superiority, the triumph of willpower over material resources, the decisive advantage of quality over quantity. In America, they confronted a humbling truth. Quantity possessed its own quality. Material abundance granted tactical flexibility unavailable to resource-scarce militaries, and democratic armies achieved discipline and effectiveness matching any authoritarian force. These professional soldiers examined closely how Americans organized militaries, managed logistics, developed combat doctrine. They studied how civilian expertise integrated into military planning, watched industrial capacity translate directly into military capability, and observed how democratic accountability strengthened rather than weakened military effectiveness. This knowledge influenced how West Germany's post-war Bundeswehr took shape, incorporating numerous American organizational methods and principles. The technical knowledge acquired by prisoners extended beyond specific manufacturing tricks to embrace entirely different approaches to innovation itself. They observed American commitment to constant improvement, how new technologies achieved rapid adoption, how advancement was encouraged rather than blocked. This innovation mindset contrasted sharply with German tradition, emphasizing perfection of existing designs. Prisoners with technical expertise particularly studied American production methods, their systematic quality control approaches, their preventive maintenance disciplines. They documented assembly line operations, examined statistical quality control, recorded preventive maintenance procedures. When this technical knowledge returned to Germany, it profoundly influenced industrial reconstruction, helping German manufacturers regain competitive advantage through the 1950s. These transformations rippled through generations. Former prisoners returned home not merely as individuals, but as fathers, educators, community figures. They raised their children differently, instilling values that contradicted everything Nazi ideology had promoted. They taught suspicion toward propaganda, appreciation for democratic governance, respect for human worth regardless of race or nationality. Children of former POWs grew up hearing accounts of American generosity and abundance rather than Nazi tales of American decadence and weakness. This intergenerational transmission of first-hand experience helped forge the pro-American attitudes that defined West Germany throughout the Cold War. The rapid Americanization of German culture during the 1950s and 1960s rested fundamentally on groundwork established by POW experiences. The 1985 reunion held in Austin, Texas powerfully illustrated the enduring impact, drawing more than 500 former prisoners who traveled to revisit the places of their transformation. These veterans came not as former adversaries, but as friends, bringing wives and children and grandchildren to see where their internal revolution had begun. During these emotional gatherings, former prisoners shared their stories. They spoke of arriving as Nazi-indoctrinated soldiers and departing as citizens committed to democracy. They credited American humanity with revealing alternatives to violence and hatred. They expressed deep gratitude for treatment exceeding anything their own government had offered, for education preparing them for peaceful rebuilding instead of continued destruction. Scholarly debate regarding the effectiveness of the German POW program continues today. Some historians argue the formal re-education curriculum achieved limited immediate results, that most prisoners concentrated on survival and going home rather than ideological change. Others maintain the long-term consequences ran extraordinarily deep, producing generations of Germans receptive to democratic principles and partnership with America. The evidence suggests validity in both interpretations. The official re-education program indeed accomplished little with dedicated Nazis or prisoners focused entirely on survival. However, the broader American experience, seeing industrial abundance and democratic prosperity functioning in reality, created impressions that lasted decades and shaped how Germany rebuilt itself. Contemporary scholarship increasingly recognizes the unintended consequences driving the POW program's actual success. While American planners concentrated on formal re-education, the genuinely transformative forces emerged from ordinary experiences and observations. Real change came through direct exposure to reality rather than through propaganda. Americans didn't convert prisoners through clever arguments, but through demonstrating productive capacity, functional democracy, and decent treatment of former enemies. The German POW experience offers valuable guidance for modern conflicts and post-conflict reconstruction. It proves that example outperforms rhetoric in shifting ideological positions, that approaching adversaries with dignity can transform them into partners, that prosperity and freedom undermine authoritarian ideologies more powerfully than military defeat standing alone. The program succeeded precisely because it eschewed psychological manipulation, instead allowing American society to function normally while prisoners simply observed. Democracy's greatest strength isn't propaganda but prosperity, not words but working systems. This insight, that free society's most effective weapon is their own functioning success, remains profoundly relevant for contemporary ideological struggles. The German POW experience represents perhaps history's most successful instance of transformation accomplished through exposure to reality. Without force or traditional propaganda, American productivity and democratic principles converted defeated adversaries into future allies. Prisoners arrived convinced of German superiority and American weakness. They departed comprehending that American democratic capitalism represented a more advanced civilization that had vanquished not merely German military forces, but the complete ideological architecture of Nazism itself. Between 1943 and 1946, more than 371,000 German prisoners passed through American camps, witnessing democracy's arsenal operating at peak capacity. They observed farmers generating food surpluses for the world, workers manufacturing instruments of victory, ordinary citizens treating enemy prisoners with undeserved kindness. They grasped that America's genuine power resided not in bombs or tanks, but in seemingly limitless productive capacity. This transformation occurred neither universally nor suddenly. Many prisoners maintained skepticism, others clung to fragments of Nazi belief. Numerous individuals remained preoccupied with simple survival and returning home. Yet the cumulative effect proved undeniable. A generation of Germans came home carrying direct knowledge of American power and material abundance, of working democracy and functioning markets, of religious liberty and human respect. These men became inadvertent champions of democracy, carrying back concepts that would germinate into among history's most successful nation-rebuilding efforts. They introduced American agricultural innovations, industrial techniques, organizational approaches. They championed democratic governance, market-based economics, and Western partnership. They educated their children according to values learned through American experience rather than Nazi teaching. West Germany's celebrated economic transformation during the 1950s rested substantially on methods and principles former prisoners had witnessed firsthand in American camps. Former POWs who had observed American operations became leaders in German reconstruction. They possessed experiential understanding that prosperity flowed from production rather than conquest, that democracy generated wealth more effectively than authoritarian systems, that treating workers as stakeholders achieved superior results compared to coercion. The Atlantic Alliance anchoring Western defense during the Cold War germinated from understanding forged in American prison camps. Former prisoners who had encountered American power alongside American generosity championed the German-American partnership. They possessed lived experience, testifying that American strength served protective purposes rather than aggressive ones, that American prosperity strengthened allies rather than exploiting them. This narrative of German POWs in America ultimately celebrates truth's victory over propaganda, reality's triumph over ideology, examples power beyond argument. These prisoners underwent conversion not through eloquent persuasion, but through undeniable evidence. Every electrical light, every automobile, every adequate meal refuted Nazi propaganda more forcefully than any speech conceivably could. German prisoners had anticipated encountering a fragmented, weak nation on economic collapse's edge. Instead, they confronted an industrial force of almost mythical capacity and surprising decency. They witnessed agricultural output capable of feeding entire nations, manufacturing capability sufficient for arming the world, democratic prosperity surpassing what monarchy had ever provided. They received kindness from former enemies that their own government had never extended. In their transformation resided the foundation for post-war European restoration and the conclusive destruction of the Nazi vision. They returned to Germany not as vanquished foes, but as witnesses to what unrestricted societies could accomplish. Their children matured in a democratic Germany partnered with the United States. This alliance emerged from transformation, originating when former Afrika Korps soldiers stepped from a train in Texas during June 1943 and discovered that foundational assumptions were utterly mistaken. The German POW experience's significance transcends individual change or bilateral relations. It illuminates how democracy's greatest strength resides not in weapons, but in uncomplicated evidence of how free societies generate abundance while honoring human dignity. The German soldiers, astonished by American industrial capacity, ultimately experienced something deeper: fundamental personal transformation. Their experience testifies to an essential insight. Occasionally, the greatest achievements occur not through destruction, but demonstration, not through conquest, but conversion, not through animosity, but genuine humanity. German prisoners began stunned by American industrial power, yet ultimately found themselves fundamentally altered by it. Within that transformation lay foundations for a superior world, constructed on comprehending that free peoples collaborating could realize more than authoritarian systems ever imagined conceivable. The German POW story wasn't merely a secondary World War II detail, but a defining moment reshaping the 20th century. It established that adversaries could become partners, that combatants could transform into constructors, that those witnessing democracy's accomplishments became its most persuasive advocates. Finally, that transformation achieved not through violence, but through honest example may represent America's most significant triumph throughout the entire war.